Howdy, folks. Welcome to the October edition of Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate. Glad to be your host. Today, we're zooming along the Chisholm Trail on a special cutoff to Indian Territory, to Enid, to learn about the Ellsworth Cut-Off and the history of the southern part of the Cox Cut-Off in that area. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the communities, historical elements, museums, and other attractions along the Chisholm and the Western Cattle Trails. Showcase is brought to you by the International Chisholm Trail Association, of which Dennis Katzenmeyer is president, Michael Grauer is vice president, Nancy Lawrence is secretary, and Mary Lou Rivers is treasurer. And Lonnie Steben is our showcase chair. It's a great time to be on this particular topic on this Zoom because the annual Chisholm Trail Conference is exactly 1 week away. Let me say a few words about that before we turn to our speaker. The Chisholm Trail events in Ellsworth begin really with a pre-conference tour next Thursday afternoon. The conference itself is on Friday there in Ellsworth, followed by a concert by R.W. Hampton on Friday night. That's going to be tremendous. Saturday is a full day of fun and entertainment in honor of the 150th anniversary of the Ellsworth Cattle Trail. There's a street dance Saturday night. Sunday is Cowboy Church. We'll say a bit more about this in a bit, but to register for the conference and to buy tickets for the R.W. Hampton concert, go to www.chisholmtrailassn.com. Follow the links to Chisholm Trail Conference. You can get registered and buy tickets for the R.W. Hampton concert, or you can buy those tickets on Eventbrite. Since next week is the 150th anniversary celebration of the Ellsworth Cut-Off from the Chisholm Trail in Indian Territory, it's a perfect time to hear about the history of the trail in what is now Oklahoma. And we're delighted that Aaron Preston is with us. Aaron's going to tell more about himself, but he's the archivist at the Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center there in Enid, Oklahoma. He's a longtime educator with degrees from Michigan State and San Jose State. Has been the archivist at the Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center since 2010. So with that, Aaron, take it away.
Thank you. Title of my presentation today is Sewell Station and the Chisholm Trail. And I'm going to hope to talk loud enough for all of you guys today. If at any point my microphone is not working up to any of your capabilities, just raise your hand or feel free to say something and I'll try to talk a little bit louder. And so Sewell Station and the Chisholm Trail. I want to kind of preface this. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As Ron was saying, I have a background in history. I have a bachelor's in history from Michigan State University. I taught 8th grade American history for a little while. And so my first master's was actually in education. And then my second master's in archival work from San Jose State University. I worked for the first 11 years in museums at the Michigan Historical Museum in Lansing. And for the past 14 years, I've been here at the Regional Heritage Center. But what does this all mean? It means I have 14 years of background in Western history. It also means I have to have kind of a broad background in Western history and Oklahoma history and Northwestern Oklahoma history. And you guys have this passion for trails history. And so you probably, know in some instances more about this subject that I'm talking to you about today. And so my whole goal here today is to leave you maybe with some nuggets that you don't know, or some really interesting facts that maybe you don't know, and hopefully just give you some interesting tidbits, but kind of keep that in mind. So the evolution of the trail. And this map was from the Oklahoma Historical Society. When the Civil War ended, Missouri and Kansas closed their borders to Texas cattle because of Texas fever. The growing demand for beef motivated cattlemen to find ways to move cattle. In 1867, Joseph McCoy persuaded local officials to lay a siding or a railway for loading freight at Abilene, Kansas, on the edge of the quarantine area. And the first herd to follow this future quote unquote Chisholm Trail to Abilene belonged to a man named O.W. Wheeler and his partners. At the North Canadian River in Indian Territory, they saw wagon tracks and followed them. The tracks had been made by a trader named Jesse Chisholm, who in 1864 began hauling trade goods to Indian camps about 220 miles south of his post near modern-day Wichita. And first, the route was merely referred to as the trail, Kansas Trail, or McCoy's Trail. And though it was originally applied to only the trail north of the Red River, cowboys soon gave Chisholm's name to the entire trail. And you see here kind of different names that sometimes you'll see on different maps that you may look at. Sometimes you see it just referred to as the trail. In a lot of different instances on old maps, you'll see it referred to as the Abilene Trail, also McCoy's Trail. When you're talking about the Chisholm Trail, depending on the age of the maps you're looking at. We'll talk about the Chisholm Trail, picking in northwestern Oklahoma. I want to talk about a specific point in general, and it's a ranch. It was first owned by a man named James Mead, and James Mead was a business associate of Jesse Chisholm, and he established a trading point at a place called Round Pond that's now called Pond Creek, Oklahoma, in the Cherokee outlet of Indian Territory, which is now in northwestern Oklahoma. It was established in 1866, and Mead was born in Vermont. If you like visiting archives, and I do because I'm an archivist, there's a large collection of his papers that are housed at Wichita State University. I know Ron was talking about that he works at Kansas State University, so maybe you guys are rivals, I'm not sure. So, but a lot of those papers at Wichita State document his dealings with banks and railroads, but also included in that archive are some of his personal diaries that chronicle his times in the Kansas Territory. He actually ended up being a pretty big deal in Kansas. He was elected to the Kansas House of Representatives. Well, 2 years after he started that ranch, or that trading post at Round Pond, a man named Eli Sewell took it over in 1868, and he fortified it with a stockade fence. This is the only picture I know that I've seen of that ranch. Sewell Station, sometimes called Sewell Stockade, it operated as kind of a general store, a stage stop, and a post office. And eventually it was sold to a man named William Mullally. He was a former U.S. Deputy Marshal, Round Pond. Well, it remained as this critical stop for drovers and kind of the last station on the drive before Caldwell. And for a short time, which we'll talk about in a moment, before Ellsworth. And so I'll probably cover it in a minute, but this was kind of a five-star luxury hotel for these drovers. You could stop and you could get all kinds of things. Caldwell businessman John Blair was the next to own this stop. John Blair and L.P. Williamson bought the station and ranch in 1880. Still at Round Pond, still at Pond Creek. William Mullally continued to operate the station, now known as Pond Creek Ranch. And Williamson and Blair spared no expense to upgrade the ranch. They constructed new cattle pens. They made the living quarters more comfortable. And for cowboys at the time, the ranch became kind of the go-to place on the Chisholm Trail before you got to Kansas to stop, rest, buy supplies before the final push to Caldwell. It served as a place, to kind of stop. If you needed to buy blankets, if you needed to stop and sleep, there were quarters to do that. If you needed to buy a deck of cards, if you needed to get a warm meal, all these things could be done there. And, it doesn't sound like much, but this was 5-star accoutrements for people that had maybe been driving these cattle from Texas to Kansas, and it took them probably months to do that. And so when you take into account, that, and, maybe you're sleeping on the ground, for a lot of that time, this was kind of a big deal. And so some of these owners, and I've talked about a lot of them now, the first was Meade, then Eli Sewell, William Mullally, then a man and a wife took it over, Anderson Hance and his wife Lydia Hance. Lydia Hance was interesting. She kind of ran the day-to-day operations of the ranch, while her husband kind of dealt with the cowboys and the branding and how many herd there were and all of that. But she was really running the budgets and how much supplies to order and things like that. And I'm going to talk about women on the Chisholm Trail in a little while, but her experiences were really sort of interesting. And then finally, another couple, Daniel Dyer, who was an agent, a Darlington agent, and Ida Marie Dyer took it over. And the stories of Lydia Hance and Anderson Hance and Daniel Dyer and Ida Marie Dyer can both be read about. There's an excellent book by Bright called Trails Old Pond Creek. And if you're interested in that. And Ida Marie Dyer took a little bit more time to adjust than Lydia Hance to working on the ranch. Dyer was quoted as saying, the roping and the branding with hieroglyphic signs that mark the ownerships of their victims involved nearly 100 cowboys with vicious-looking jingling spurs, which I thought was kind of an interesting take on what she was sort of horrified by or seemed to be horrified by. Whereas Lydia Hance kind of dove right in and was dealing with really the day-to-day, budgeting and running of the actual place. Ellsworth. A man named William Cox marked, I wouldn't say a new trail, although that's what I have written here, but a jog, which shortened the trail by about 20 miles. Ellsworth wasn't on the Chisholm Trail, but he found a branch in a trail, in the trail that was shorter to split off past Wichita, moving west, and then finally north through Ellenwood to Ellsworth, which came to be known, as you know, as the Ellsworth Cut-Off, or sometimes simply as Cox's Cut-Off, which you guys, it seems, will be celebrating in a few days. For a short time, more than 200,000 people passed through Ellsworth in 1872. In that same year, and that shouldn't say people, more than 200,000 cattle passed through Ellsworth in 1872. In that same year, the town had a population of fewer than 1,000. And Ellsworth's townspeople lauded the town and thought its businesses would continue just to grow and grow and grow. For a short time, there was talk that Ellsworth might be the capital of Kansas. They thought Kansas would grow due to the Kansas Pacific Railroad. However, many saw the economy of the town was too tied to that rail line being there. And so a plan was hatched to attract a second rail line, the Memphis and the Northern Railroad, but that they were unable to acquire that second rail line. One set of Ellsworth's town people who really hated the drovers were the local farmers. The drovers' cattle were constantly mixing with theirs. There was still, despite the guarantee that the drovers were outside the quarantine area and free of that tick fever, there's still concerns that the drovers' cattle were infecting the local cows. And the farmers didn't like it. Secondarily, with this big boon of people, not only animals, there was a lot of chaos, which we'll talk about in a moment. Boosters in other towns kind of smelled blood. Stories in the Wichita paper ran, denigrating Ellsworth. Wichita had several advantages over Ellsworth. It was located south of Ellsworth, also outside the quarantine line, and at a river junction. It was larger. It made it easier to attract businesses and visitors. And so they were saying things, along with other towns and other newspapers in other towns, saying, hey, why would you consistently ship cattle to Ellsworth when you could do it here or there or here? And so Ellsworth didn't last really super long. In his book, Jonathan Specht writes, in 1874, quote, half as many cattle passed through Ellsworth as in the previous year. The reasons cited ranged from a bad winter, likely exaggerated, to upstart rivals, true, and the spread of railroads to Texas, the long-term issue. Though Kansas's shipments overall, it did appear that rival towns such as Russell and particularly Wichita were capturing more and more of the cattle trade. And by 1875, the industry was coming to an end for Ellsworth. At the end of 1874, a letter to the editor in the Ellsworth Reporter remarked of the city, quote, we shall never have to depend more upon our resources, unquote. And by the way, Specht's book is called For the Future in the Distance, Cattle Trailing, Social Conflict, and the Development of Ellsworth, Kansas, if you're interested. Ellsworth's reputation, I told you I'd get back to this. For what it's worth, even at its short peak, which was only a few years, as I said, other towns didn't really have to stretch the truth to disparage Ellsworth. It had a well-earned reputation for rowdiness and vice. On August 15th, 1873, an argument occurred in a saloon over a card game. A cowboy stepped out into the street and, aiming at another man, accidentally shot the Ellsworth County Sheriff. The town is also well known for gambling and for houses of ill repute. The Ellsworth Reporter wrote of a drunken prostitute being taken to jail. The police officer insisted on her walking while she, quote, insisted on being carried. I want to just hit on a couple of other things just because I find them interesting. One is music on the trail. Music was a large part of life for cowboys on the trail in general. Cowboys sang, they whistled, they hummed in order to keep track of where each other was. The sounds of the songs also soothed the herd from being frightened of sudden noises. One of the songs that was invented and sang on the trail was called the Old Chisholm Trail. Just a few of the verses are as follows. Come along, boys, and listen to my tale. I'm not going to sing it. I'll tell you of my troubles on the Old Chisholm Trail. I'll start up the trail October 23rd. I started up the trail with the two you heard. Oh, a $10 hoss and a $40 saddle, and I'm going to punch in Texas cattle. I woke up one morning on the Chisholm Trail, rope in my hand and a cow by the tail. And then the chorus again. And so you can see they probably played a role in morale. They probably played a role in, I don't know how much they played a role in soothing the herd, but probably to at least some small degree. And probably just for entertaining one another. I told you I would get back to talking a little bit about women on the trail. A few women made the trip up the Chisholm Trail. Some rode for a chance at wealth after their husband's death. Others actively played critical roles as active entrepreneurs, making business decisions while their husbands drove the herd. One woman was Mary Taylor Bunton. She made the trip up the trail in 1886, and Mary's husband, James, decided to take some of his cattle to Kansas, and Mary joined him. And after the drive, Mary continued to help in the roundups on their ranch. In 1927, the Trail Drivers Association inducted Mary as an honorary member, and her book, A Bride on the Old Chisholm Trail, gives insights of her life as a woman on the trail. One quote that I like of hers says, "Riding ahead of the herd, I would turn in my saddle." You can imagine her riding side saddle. Riding ahead of the herd, I would turn in my saddle and look back, and it would look as if the entire face of the earth was moving en masse, in a mass of heads and horns. And that was from her book, Mary Bunton in A Bride on the Old Chisholm Trail. Of course, I've also mentioned Lydia Hance, who ran the day-to-day operations of Pond Creek Ranch with her husband, Anderson Hance. I mentioned Ida Marie Dyer. Women may have not been the norm on the trail, but their presence was there. Another notable woman on the trail was Hattie Cluck, allegedly the first woman to ride up the Texas cattle trails. And her story was chronicled in Stein's book, Texas Women on the Cattle Trails. Another aspect of the trails that always fascinates me is branding. And again, these are just a few little things that are interesting to me. I think probably several of you own ranches. This will not be anything new to you, but maybe it is. So this is just one letter, right? The letter A, and there's the regular A. There's like the tilting A, the walking A you can see with the legs, the flying A with the wings, the dragged A, the lazy A, which is laying down, and the crazy A, which is upside down. So you think about all the different letters, all the different numbers, and these are only 7 very common, I guess, terms you hear in branding. And if many of you are probably ranchers or have dealt with ranchers a lot, and probably think nothing of it. Oh well, that's just the flying A ranch or whatever. But if you think of how many different combinations with how many different letters and how many different numbers and all of that, and I only picked about 7 that are used a lot, and I just picked one letter, and it always astonishes me to kind of think about, and I don't know, maybe you even can think of some more. I really wanted to play this for you. Here at my archive at the Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center, I have over 400 oral histories of different people, different aspects of life. One of the oral histories I have was done in 1951 by a man named Ed Stinnett. And Ed Stinnett drove cattle up the Chisholm Trail at 11 years of age. And so in the 1880s. And so I had tried to embed this audio file on here for you to listen to the actual words from the actual man. And I really tried as I might to try to get this to work. You can contact me at any time, and I can try to get you a piece of this file, or you can visit me here at the archives and do the same. But I didn't get this working, but I can try to read you part of it. And we'll all have to kind of use your imaginations. This is a transcription of part of that interview. Because what I did was it was actually recorded on an old reel-to-reel. This was before cassette tapes, anything like this. This was recorded in 1951. He was 81 years old in 1951. He had made his way up the Chisholm Trail in the 1880s, in 1883. And so he was already 81 years old in 1951. And so I took it from the old reel-to-reel and migrated it to an MP3 that could be, number one, preserved better, but and I tried to embed it here, but for some reason Zoom didn't like it. So I'm going to try to read you a portion of that right now. And a quick question: have you seen any of the documents of the role of the Texas and Mexican involvement on the Chisholm Trail? I don't think so.
The vaqueros, that's been an interest of ours, and Gene really is the go-to person for knowledge of the vaqueros and the Mexican influence on the trail. So that's something we want to learn more about. I'm curious about Ed Stinnett's words.
Yeah, I'll finish up with this, and then I'll get into any questions. So the interviewer says, Ed, you told me you came up the Chisholm Trail when you were 11 years of age. That would have been in 1883. Ed says, yes, it's 1883. At the time, we had to drive cattle to market. There was no railroad in that country, and Honeywell was the end of the railroad at the time. So we drove the cattle there for shipping. My father came with 6,000 head. Interviewer, 6,000 head? 6,000 head, 6,000 head of longhorn cattle. and they shipped out from Kansas City and St. Louis. That was just about 10 years before the strip was open. Where did you start from in Texas? We started out from my father's ranch in Tom Green County, Texas. That's in eastern Texas, is it not? No, down by the coast, close to Old Mexico. What did the Chisholm Trail look like in those days, Ed? The Chisholm Trail was just a wagon road, of course, where Jesse Chisholm hauled freight to the soldiers, you know. However, the Chisholm Trail itself, where they drove cattle, was about 10 miles wide, and there was a fence on each side of that road. And the road is where they would drive their old chuck wagons up the road, and the cattle would lead in front of the truck wagons. In some places, it was wider, where they used rivers for fences. But as a rule, from Texas to Kansas, it was 5 miles wide on each side. It wasn't fenced all the way up, was it? Well, mostly all the way up through the territory. That's Oklahoma territory. Of course, it was free range in Texas, and it took more cowboys there. It was quite a road, wasn't it? That was the interviewer. Stinnett. We started down from Texas. My father did. We left in the fall, grazed them cattle, and arrived the next fall. It was great cattle country. Did you pass along a lot of freighters along the way? Stinnett. Not very many. At the time, it was all stagecoaches. We'd meet a stagecoach every day. It was coming from Kansas City, but not very many. There weren't many freighters in the country. Do you remember passing through the Cherokee Outlet on that trip? Oh, yeah. Do you remember the old skeleton stage station northeast of town? That's where Enid currently is, Enid, Oklahoma. That's where I am. Oh, yeah. After you shipped your cattle up there, you went back to Texas, didn't you? Of course, we sold everything we had, and my father got a carriage, I believe. He took some of them cowboys back to Texas, and then some of them went back on horseback. At the time, 200 or 300 miles on horseback is about what it is to go to Oklahoma City by car nowadays. So that's a portion of the oral history of his. And I wish you could have heard it from the horse's mouth, but it's quite interesting. So with that, I hoped to give you some tidbits. I hope to give you an idea of some of the things we had in our archive, and I hoped to give you an idea a little bit of some of the things that went on here in Northwest Oklahoma, particularly Quantic Ranch, later Sewell Station. That was kind of the beginning as you went to Caldwell and up through and later on a little background onto what you'll be celebrating next week, which is Ellsworth. So if anybody has any questions, I'll do my best.
Aaron, thank you. Fascinating. That oral history is a treasure. That is a gem to have. Can't wait to come to the museum and hear that in person, or find a way to share that. That's remarkable. And I think you said it just right, that the original Chisholm Trail was where Chisholm was trading from the Canadian River north to Wichita, and then it would become known as the Chisholm Trail, the entire length of the trail. And obviously Ed Stinnett was referring to it as the Chisholm Trail as he traveled it in 1883. So I find that very interesting, as well as the fact that the woman, the trail bride that you mentioned, actually is a topic of one of our speakers at the Chisholm Trail Conference next week. So it's a perfect fit with what we're learning. One question I did have, I'll see if other folks have questions. One of the owners or operators of the Sewell station was a Darlington agent. And
yes.
I understand Darlington was the Indian agency. Is that what it meant to be
Yes.
Darlington agent?
Yep. That's correct.
So that
James
was
Dyer.
Indian agency that served the tribes in that region.
Yes. And I can't recall, I think he had been a former Darlington agent. And then he took over the ranch.
Very good.
Where I might have missed it. Where was Stinnett going in 1883? What was the destination?
Honeywell,
Honeywell. Okay.
yeah.
Which is near Caldwell, is that right? Down on the Kansas border?
It's on the southern Kansas border.
Okay. That makes sense.
Other questions?
Yeah, Aaron, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I couldn't get through to you earlier. Number one, I'm Dennis Katzmeyer, and I really appreciate what you've just shared with us. I'm a native Kansan, lived in Ellsworth all my life, loved the Chisholm Trail and the Ellsworth Cut-Off coming to us. And so that's why we're having this 150th anniversary and conference here. 1873 was the big year for us, which you're probably well aware of. In fact, I live in the house that was owned by a prominent attorney in Ellsworth that had a lot of difficulties with law enforcement when he first came to town because it was corrupt and he was trying to straighten it out. So I can really appreciate everything you're sharing with us. I have learned a lot about the ranch down there at Pond Creek. I've been informed by Jefferson City that they were pretty active as well. Can you shed any light on that?
I've not heard of Jefferson
I know
City.
It's
supposedly close to Pond Creek, and I've
yeah,
talked to
there's a town called Jefferson in Grant County, which is the same county that that Pond Creek is in. I don't know if there was another station there, or a smaller station. So it's not something I want to say yay or nay on, or if they were, or if maybe they were just very active. Down here in Oklahoma, we had a lot of different corporations, doing before they outlawed a lot of that ranching. There were just a lot of different sort of corporate cattle ranching going on around that time. So I don't know for certain.
well, and I
As
hadn't
far as
realized.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I hadn't realized. I always knew Pond Creek was the key cutoff point, but in talking to some Jefferson mayor, actually, they kind of laid claim that they were as important as Pond Creek was, and I had never heard that before.
I had never heard Pond Creek
The
referred to as
the two are almost on top of one another, so it may be one and the same,
Okay.
Aaron,
I'd also, excuse me, I'd also like to invite you to Ellsworth next weekend. Love to have you.
And this book is very good too, by Specht on Ellsworth history. I don't know if I'd encourage you to check it out. It's very helpful in my research for the talk today.
Okay.
On just Ellsworth history.
Aaron, do you know the date of the picture that's showing now of the Cowboys and doing I guess the branding? Do you know the
1888.
date of that picture?
1888.
1888?
Yep.
Okay, that explains it. I look behind it and see a barbed wire fence, which only came in 74. So needed to ask what was the date of the picture. So 88, okay, that works for
Yeah.
me.
It just was one I thought, I'll put this here.
It's interesting that the slide, the book apparently refers to Russell capturing more of the cattle trade. That's intriguing. You know, Wichita was such a huge part, but we don't know as much about Russell. And
There were a number of different towns that after they saw Ellsworth sort of struggling with, you name it, whether it was violence or whether it was struggling, where they didn't get that second railroad. There were a number, 3, 4, 5 towns that kind of jumped in, that smelled blood. Wichita was by far the biggest, and the most well-positioned geographically and population-wise and things like that to be in position to, capture a lot of the cattle that were coming later. But there were other towns that tried to do the same thing. They're like, running smear campaigns in the newspaper has been around for a long time. So it certainly was done back then. And like I said, they didn't have to stretch the truth much to say that there was shootings going on or violence going on or vice, gambling, things like that, because frankly, it was the truth. So
Jim Gray has written a book about the violence in Ellsworth. It was a bloody community, apparently, and now we're headed there in a week. So I hope Dennis has it calmed down.
Working on it.
Do you know, Aaron, if the Texas women on the cattle trails or the bride on the old Chisholm Trail are still available?
I think Bride on the Old Chisholm Trail is digitized. I think probably if you Google or Yahoo or something like that and just type it in, it should come up. And if it doesn't, like in Google Books or something like that, and if it doesn't,
And I was going to tell you at the first, you said we might know as much as you do. I'm sorry, but I learned a lot from your talk.
That's it.
oh,
It was
that's
really
good.
interesting about they followed some tracks, and because that was Jesse Chisholm's tracks. I'm sure I've heard it before, but I'm one of those kind of people who has to be told several times, and I need visuals. And you did that for me today. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's gratifying.
That's great stuff. Great stuff.
I'm pretty sure Bride on the Old Chisholm Trail is on Google Books, and if it's not, you might want to check something like a portal to Texas history. They might have it digitized too, or maybe Gateway to Oklahoma. Those two, one of those two might have it if Google Books doesn't. So,
All right.
And as mentioned, that is a topic for one of our speakers next week at the conference. The Bride on the Old Chisholm.
the Mary Bunton.
Yes. Yes.
Mary Molly Taylor Bunton. She went by a couple of names, but
Let's see.
Any
Any other questions for her?
interesting person.
Must have been.
Well, I'm glad to have spoken with you folks today. Is there any last questions before?
Not seeing any questions. How about a virtual round of applause here for Aaron and a terrific presentation?
I do have one thing to share with Aaron. in 17, we placed an Ellsworth trail marker at Sewell Station by the railroad tracks. Are you aware of that?
I saw that in some of the research I did for this presentation. Ellsworth Chisholm Trail marker.
Yes.
Yes.
We have put together and had a dedication here in Ellsworth as the end of that trail. And we've got a marker that we've, in the International Chisholm Trail Association, financed that. And we have a marker that tells a story about how the trail broke off from Chisholm. And I've been trying to work with Pond Creek and Jefferson to set up a time and a place, not a place, we know the place, to set that marker. And I'm having difficulty making contact with folks. If you have any connections there, I'd appreciate some assistance in getting some communications going so we can designate a certain date. We were shooting, Ellsworth had their celebration on April 12th, I believe, when Cox left there to survey. And our plan was May 1, we was going to set the marker at Pond Creek, but they wanted us to wait until they could put a celebration together. So we're sitting here with a marker, ready to place it, and need a celebration to make it happen. So any assistance you can give us there would be appreciated.
I see Carla unmuted.
I did. That county, the county of Grant County, is a very small county, less than 1,000 people in the whole county. Their county seat is Medford, and their city manager there in Medford, Dia Mandeville. I know she's been very active and is very interested in this particular celebration. I'm going to refer you to her, and I can get you her contact information. The town of Jefferson, which is actually, I think at the time, the ranch was actually located in Jefferson, but that town doesn't exist anymore. And so the next closest town is Pond Creek. But Medford is on the other side of Jefferson. So is not much further than, because they're all about 10 miles apart from each other. And so I would probably refer you to her to do it more as a county event. Might be as far as the celebration of it. She would be the mover and shaker for that county.
Mrs. Clover, I believe, is the mayor, or I was told.
Of Pond Creek,
No, of Jefferson.
Oh, of Jefferson. Okay.
And I've had conversation with her, but I just sent out an email a couple weeks ago to all those individuals, Pond Creek, Jefferson, and I think I sent it to Rob at Enid.
Okay.
Trying to get something put together, and I've received no response. But yeah, if you will post that or send it to me or whatever I can do to get a hold of that, I'll be happy to get a hold of her.
Okay. And I'd be happy to help in any way I can also. I know that is one of the counties that I do represent. So yeah, I'd be happy to help you and her and whoever else is involved. I'd be happy to make sure that it is publicized and so forth. So
okay. Well, Carla, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
We really appreciate that. I think we're at our time boundary for our program. I would note in the chat that Jeff Davidson has posted that the book Bride on the Chisholm Trail is indeed available on Amazon in paperback. So you can look on Amazon and find the book for $18.95 and get the book that Aaron was referring to. Again, Aaron, thanks for a terrific and really interesting program. I'd never heard Pond Creek referred to as Round Pond before, and a lot of interesting and informative tidbits. So many thanks to Aaron. We're going to have some more discussion with the Chisholm Trail Board in a minute, but for now, I just wanted to make sure to remind you, Chisholm Trail Conference and the big sesquicentennial in Ellsworth next week. And then our next Cattle Trails Showcase will be on November 10, second Friday of November. So make sure you join us at that time. To close our program today, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everyone.